the thing about I discovered when I first started looking at the mushrooms the other day is that they have a texture, or they have a variety of textures. There's the actual back of the mushroom. I'll just show you with this one that I've got here. This one is not terribly interesting now because I don't think it's very fresh. But when they are fresh, you're very aware of the scaliness of the back of the actual this bit of the mushroom. And they feel kind of cold when I first got them, they felt very cold. This doesn't feel very cold because it's been sitting in here and it's warm in here. They feel slightly cold, and they're also, it's slightly velvety, which is very different to the inside. Now this mushroom is obviously, you can't see down inside, it hasn't opened up yet, but these others which I've got are lovely. The inside structure of the mushroom is absolutely beautiful, and a really lovely contrast to the sort of light outer form, and it's these amazing sort of soft fawny colors or mushroom colors that you get on the other side. That's just one or two aspects of it, but then also remember these are three-dimensional forms, and part of creating something that is intriguing is having areas where the light gets, disappears underneath the form of the mushroom, and you get this sort of dark shadows. And the cast shadows, well, in my case, there are cast shadows because I've got a light on them. And like I was saying last week with the tissue paper, you do need to create tones. There isn't a huge lot of color here, but there's, even so, you need to have some very darks, and even where the mushroom goes back underneath, I could probably develop this a bit more. They're darker tones, then there's half tones, and then there's this really light part of the top of the mushrooms where there's, the color is virtually disappearing out of the wash. So think about the tones on your mushroom. As I look in the camera at my mushrooms on the board, there are definite parts of my mushrooms that are very, very dark, and they contrast beautifully with the lighter areas. But the use of tone across form is what makes things three-dimensional, and we need to all of us try and remember that somehow or other, when we're building up the form of the mushroom, or whatever shape it is that we're painting, that we need to consider how the light is affecting that particular shape. In painting, there is, well, certainly if you were doing landscape painting, you would use something called aerial perspective. An aerial perspective is where the colors blue and soften as things get further away from you. However, even in a still life, if you've got the things that are closer to you, I would use slightly warmer tints on, and then the shape as it is a bit further away from you, slightly cooler. Now, the way to make things warmer is to introduce the colors in the warm side of the spectrum. That's the reds. Okay, and it doesn't mean you go put bright pillar box red at the front. You just use a tiny bit of red in the mixture so it warms it up. And similarly, in the areas that you want to appear further back, you might use some blue. Okay, tiny bit. I'm not talking about lots. The other thing, which is something I discussed with Chris this morning, if you have one shape behind another, and you want there's clearly one, this one here, for instance, is clearly in front of that one, I will have to endeavor with the way I paint this to make it look as though it's closer to me. It's not just about the shape, but it's the type of colors I use as well that will enable me to do that. Now, this rather random background occurred on Tuesday when the sunlight was casting cast shadows onto my board, and I was painting with my sister, and she said, quickly paint it, paint it. So I thought, okay, I'll paint it. And actually I think it could work very well with this subject. You know, I think, you know, often we totally ignore the background, or we leave things white when we're doing still, you know, watercolor still lives. But it is, I think, also a point that one should perhaps think about the background. I mean, it may be that you've got something very interesting behind your mushrooms. I've got the garden here. I could have actually done a bit through the window, but just think about it. Just look at the whole subject and consider how you possibly might treat it. It doesn't need to be noisy. It needs to be quiet, the background, so that it enhances or pushes your subject forward. If you've got nothing behind your mushrooms or your whatever you've got in front of you, and you used a board like I sometimes do, I sometimes put my cardboard boards behind it, so I block out everything else, that will still pick up something. So you know, do consider that as well. These are just cast shadows, and I did it with 2 colors, and it seems to be working with the subject as it stands at the moment anyway. The camera on the iPad is at a slightly different angle, and just for those that came in late, I did start this on Tuesday. I have put in a suggestion of a background, and I have put in some cast shadows, and I have painted one of the mushrooms. It's not finished, and I may put some more bits of tone on the bottom of it, but I'm going to now start to develop the rest of the composition. So ask me if you need to ask me anything. Remember that the rule with watercolor is you start with your lightest colors first, and if there is white in your mushroom, pure white, then leave that as paper, don't paint it in. Yeah, get the light tones in first so you can begin to see the form, and then if you know how to and you're happy to, I would gradually, I'd work on one mushroom at a time, and I would fuse in while the first color is still damp. You can fuse in the next tone, which will be slightly darker. But if it's just, remember, if it's too wet, it'll run. So you've got to judge when to drop that color in. And if you want help with it, I'll go over it with mine.
Sue, could you suggest what you use? You said a fawny kind of color or something, or is that gray?
Where?
In the mushroom, in there's what's in the middle of the big mushroom.
Here.
Yeah.
This is, well, I mixed up a brown, and then I went over it with a darker brown.
Okay. And then.
But I did that after I'd done this bit and all this.
Okay. And you did those are just basically left white with some little bits of, is that brown? Or
this is white, and then this is like my first wash, which was a sort of mushroomy color that I mixed up.
Okay.
I'll just get the palette, then I can show you. Difficult to see. I know it looks a mess, but I like to reuse my palettes. This color here, if I look at it, is probably, I'm going to put this down on my board, and I'll show you the color on a piece of paper.
Okay.
So I've arrived at this color from, I would imagine, using a little bit of alizarin and some blue, and maybe even a bit of this raw sienna. I think the raw sienna is quite a useful color to have for the mushrooms. Now that is that color at the moment, which is, if I was going to put that on the mushrooms, it's probably a bit too strong, so I'd add more water. And I think I would probably try and warm it up a bit, so I put a bit of this sienna color into it. So if I add some sienna into it, it makes it a slightly warmer color. I think that's better. I probably start with something like that for the first wash. That may be too dark, so I usually just put a tiny bit on, and then I check to see whether it's right for what I'm trying to work with.
Okay, and when you said you put more sienna in it, that was not the raw sienna you put in. You put in
raw
extra
sienna,
of,
raw sienna.
it was the raw. Okay.
Yes, raw sienna.
Okay, to warm it up. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm sorry if this looks a bit of a mess, but some of these colors I will reconstitute, reuse. This is why I leave them on the palette and I don't wash them away.
I'm the messiest person on earth, so it looks perfect to me. All right.
Okay. So, right, that's the color I've got. If I'm starting with this mushroom here, the sort of first colors that I deal with is probably the stalk and this bit round the top, which is quite similar to the color I've mixed. Now remember, colors dry paler with watercolor.